Welcome to our first Aftershow. This comes on the heels of a wonderful interview and discussion with Mónica Guzmán, who's one of the leading depolarizing experts in the country. I have the wonderful opportunity to talk to two people here at Positive Connection Initiative, Trevor, the co-founder, and Sahar, our center, heart, and soul, who is our head of operations. We're about to engage in just a conversation about our reflections and thoughts about this wonderful episode. And to start this segment, I will pass this to Trevor.
All right. Hi, everyone. Man, I have so many notes from this episode. There's so much great stuff to talk about here. I'm going to narrow in on one topic that she touched on more towards the beginning of the episode, and that's perception gap. She cited a study that I had seen a few years ago. I think it originally came out from the group More in Common in 2019, that the more news media a person consumes on average, the more misinformed they are about the ideological makeup of the outgroup, the other side. So one of the points that was made in this study is that the more educated you are, the more your perception gap is going to be, and that's especially true for Democrats. So education is not necessarily the answer for how to decrease the perception gap, but it's also not consuming news media. It kind of begs the question, how do you individually decrease your perception gap and get an accurate view of what the other party is thinking and feeling? And one of those answers is dialogue, and that's the work that we've been doing now for a few years. That takes a lot of hard work. It takes a skill set, and it takes opportunity. All right, we're in our bubbles so often that we often don't have the opportunity to talk to people that ideologically disagree with us. And if we do, maybe it's not in a setting where it's appropriate to dig into political issues and really ask them those curious questions to find out what they're thinking, what they're feeling. So my question to pose to the group here is, what can we do to gain an accurate understanding of what the other side is thinking?
Trev, I also, when I was listening to the episode and I was taking some notes, this piece around perception, I also noted. And what Mónica had said, and I don't want to quote her, but along these lines, she was saying that she was more concerned and felt like the more dangerous form of misinformation isn't news and events, but it's like the assumption we make about what's in people's hearts. Dialogue and curiosity. There was so much talk about curiosity throughout the whole episode. I was noting a lot of great reminders. It's not something that is a personality trait. It's something that you can develop. It's something you can practice. You can learn it. But I think having the awareness that that is a tool, and if you're not great at it, that's something I'm working on, is the skill of curiosity. I'm in a coaching program so that I can practice the skill of curiosity because I know how important it is to connect with other human beings and to ask curious, powerful questions to get at the heart of who they are and what they think. So that was the first thing that came to my head when you asked that.
So, Sahar, you just mentioned using a skill set of curiosity. But even before you get to the skill set, I think, Trevor, just prompting the question is half the battle. Just having that awareness that I'm generalizing about other people and their belief system may give you that sort of open-mindedness. I had a conversation the other day with a friend from a different political party, and I had expected him to answer a bunch of questions in a particular way. And I was blown away when I was asking him questions, and he didn't. And in particular, I said, so you're happy with the candidate that you voted for? And he said, yes. And I said, if you had to do it over again, would you vote for him? And he said, yes. Then I said, well, are you happy with everything that's happening? And he said, no. And that sort of blew me away. I was like, I had expected he's saying that I'm happy with what's going on. I would vote for that person again. And therefore, I'm signing off on everything that's happening. I think a lot of times the left does that about the right and the right does that about the left, where we generalize that, oh, if you're on the left, you believe this way and you accept everything that way. And if you're on the right, vice versa. And I think the nuance is the complexity. That you can believe something that people on the left believe and things that people on the right believe at the same time. You could believe that immigration is a problem, we should be fixing it, but maybe not exactly the way we're doing so. So I think just the awareness that people just don't all have opinions that fit one way or the other, that it's more complex, is a great start.
That kind of reminds me, we often speak in similar terms about sports and politics, how it's like a team game. But in politics, there's so much more nuance, right? So when the Bills lose in the playoffs after 5 turnovers, I can accurately guess how everyone in the room is feeling in that moment. But when Trump passes an executive order and he totes it as a victory, I can't go and make those same assumptions that everyone, one side or the other is feeling a certain way about that action, because politics is not a game. And it's not a team sport, even though we so often use that metaphor to describe it.
Yeah, I agree. Sports is definitely more binary. It's either they win or they lose. And in politics, it's more complicated. There's things that folks on the left say and do that I agree with, and things I disagree with. There's things that folks on the right say or do that I agree with, and there's things I disagree with. And, Monica talked about that. We don't have to be certain when we speak. We could
Yeah.
be a little bit unsure. You could be vulnerable. You can say, I like this, but I'm concerned about this, which really opens you up. And I find when, her episode was really about left-right conversations, essentially about political discourse and disagreement. But the more vulnerability we can show and the more nuance, I think we can accomplish what's troubling you. And, the great point that you brought up about perception gap.
Yeah, and Bill, to your point about vulnerability, I feel like especially when it comes to politics, we have our guard up and there's almost even a tension and I'm generalizing, maybe everyone isn't like this, but at least for me, if I'm going to be speaking with someone who is on the other side of the political aisle, I don't know, I almost feel like I am putting up an armor or I need to defend X, Y, and Z. And then they're going to do the same thing. They're going to mirror that energy. But if your energy is more open, is more curious, is more vulnerable, then you're giving both of you permission to go that route.
What's interesting, and Monica talked about, is a lot of times when people talk when they disagree, the more open the conversation, the more they can find common ground. I just feel as though we're missing the fact too often that we agree with lots of things with people that may be of different political persuasions or different size or shape from us. And if you have that open-mindedness that maybe there's a lot more we agree about than we disagree about, it could foster that a conversation that decreases the perception gap.
Well, to that point, I was actually going to segue into what I really loved that she talked about, and I want both of your opinions on this because you've been in this dialogue space for much longer than I have. But she talked about simple tweaks we can make to the questions that we ask the other person we're talking to. So one of her examples was instead of asking, why do you believe what you believe? Changing that to, how did you come to believe what you believe? Like that small tweak and how impactful that is, right? Like the use of language when we're talking with each other and how important the words are. And like getting to the story, not just why, but how. One of the things I wrote down, and I need to find like the person that said it because she quoted someone directly, but she said, the shortest distance between two people is a story. And so that's something that I want to get better at. And so I'm just curious, like, other than like the why do you believe what you believe to how did you come to that? Do you guys, I don't know, do you have any other thoughts on it or examples or anything you can share around that?
You know what I like about that question is it opens up the conversation beyond the topic and it brings it to the person and their experiences. People who believe that we should all be able to have open carry may have had upbringing or experiences that dramatically impacted them. And I think it's terrible to judge people just by a position they're taking instead of really understanding their people. They've lived a life of experiences and they believe certain things based on those experiences. So I really do love the concept of going beyond the policy point and connecting with the person. Because then if you walk away and you still disagree about an issue, you still feel like you're connected with them. You're like, wow, this person we're going through the same life together. We have a lot of similarity and commonality. And I learned a lot more about their background. I really like that you brought that up, Sahar. So I'll share something that I really liked about the episode is that Monica talked about engagement or lack of engagement. And she basically said, this is great. If you don't engage, you shrink your world. Do you know how many people I know on the left who say I'm not going to Florida? And I'm sure there's people on the right that's saying I'm not going to go to LA or New York. You can understand that they think I'm now going to be in a seabed of people who I disagree with. But they've just, first of all, exaggerated, generalized, and really shrunk their world. And if you shrink away from engaging with people that you disagree with, you've shrunken your world, you've shrunken your exposures. Whereas Monica talked about if you engage, you learn, you get to listen to yourself. Maybe you reconsider your own position when people are asking you questions. You learn about another person's perspective, and maybe you understand an issue differently. You grow and you give yourself a chance to find commonality. So if you think about the type of person we all want to be tomorrow is, do you want to shrink or do you want to give yourself the chance to grow and learn? So this engagement for the simple act of growth is something that really resonated with me.
I love that, and that was something I noted too, and she also later goes on to say that when you develop that relationship with someone that you have differences with, that you can both challenge each other to sharpen your views. And so again, you're not like trying to agree, you're not trying to change anyone's mind, but like you're both going to your view may evolve in the same direction it already was going. It may go in a different direction, but either way, you're like kind of yeah, she used the word sharpen, which I thought was interesting, and then it reminded me of the relationship between Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Scalia and how they were on the polar opposites on so many issues, and yet they had this beautiful friendship, and how that must have been a part of it, right? Was that like they were able to have conversations where they challenged each other and sharpened each other's views on whatever the topic was, and that was okay. And not only okay, but like a beautiful result.
Yeah, we don't want to live in a world where everybody agrees. We don't want to be fighting with each other. We want to have healthy disagreement. We want to challenge our own perspectives, our thoughts. Otherwise, life is not as interesting.
One thing that you said, Bill, about Monica's discussion of fear, she also brought up hate and how you can fear these people who you believe hate you, and through that fear succumb to the hate itself and begin to hate these people. And then you become, part of what you were fearing to begin with. And how she said that there's some people out there that, who have succumbed to hate, and those are people to genuinely fear, but that we owe it to ourselves to distinguish between the people that we really should fear and those who we simply disagree with, but that bear us no ill will. That really stuck with me.
You bring up a good point because I don't believe, and I'm sure Monica agrees, that we don't need to be talking to everybody. There are people that are extreme, and I don't think it's our responsibility as a fellow citizen to engage everybody, especially those that don't engage in healthy, positive civil discourse. So we do need to differentiate between talking to people that you disagree with and talking to people that maybe have a contempt or a hate or don't play by the same open-minded, curious rules that you're playing by. I think it's important to differentiate those relationships when you do engage. Now, we talked with Monica, what about your best friend that you disagree with? I'm not, and I think about that all the time. It's like, I don't know that you have to engage that best friend. You could, but I don't know that you have to still, be friends with them. So it's something that's almost going into these conversations we might want to be mindful of like, who are we talking to? What rules are they playing by?
Yeah.
Are they being positive? Are they being curious? Are they being open? Are they playing by the same rules I'm playing by? And if not, I think what Braver Angels teaches, that's the nonprofit that works on depolarizing communications that Monica's connected with. They say it's great to say, let's just agree to disagree, which is a very fair way to tell somebody that we don't need to continue talking, but without basically denigrating them.
Yeah. And, they say in the world of dialogue that to have a constructive dialogue, you need to have both people coming in with the intent to understand each other, right? If you are trying to understand another person and they are trying to convince you or espouse their own views, then you're not really going to have a growth experience. And the scary thing is that when you're entering a conversation, you usually don't know what the other person's intention is. But one thing that Monica said that stuck with me was to speak more honestly about the level of confidence in your opinion. And that's a quote that she said that I jotted down. And what she said is that if you acknowledge, listen, I'm like 65% convinced of this, then they will kind of come into the conversation and meet you where you are and acknowledge their own level of confidence in their opinions. And you can kind of set the tone that way.
I want to share one more thing. Trev and Bill, I think both of you kind of just talked about this, was who you're talking to and that both people are playing by the same rules to have this conversation. And I think, at least for me and our listeners, we're all coming in with our own lens. Like you're listening to this episode and you have certain people maybe in mind as you listen through. And so while I was listening to this episode, I'm thinking about people I have in my network who are on the other side of the political aisle and having conversations with them, not necessarily with a stranger. I'm thinking about people in my life, relationships that I value, and how can I do that? Because to be frank, I've really avoided those conversations because I didn't know how to start them. I didn't want it to negatively impact our friendship. And so I avoided them, or I have and am avoiding them. But what I really appreciated was that she gave us, and Bill, both of you gave us examples. Here's a way to tweak some language in a question that you can ask. Here's something I did with my friend. Monica talked about how she was like, yeah, we've never talked about this, but can I ask you a question? And I'm here as someone who's curious. I want to hear what you think. There's no judgment. And I think having those practical, tangible prompts even can spark some ideas on how to have these conversations. And again, in my mind, I'm thinking these are happening with people in my life. And there is already a level of like love and respect there. And so we're not going to, have a blowout over it.
Well, let's go around the room here. Can you guys come up with one way that you think you might be different in your next challenging conversation?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm going to continue to think of curiosity as a practice. And something Monica said that kind of I want to make a motto is that curiosity is care. It's showing someone you care.
Nice. Trev?
One thing that Monica spoke about was that there's these tools and techniques to engage, and the techniques themselves are not technically difficult, but they can be psychologically difficult. They require some bravery to broach the conversation. So I think, I'm going to make an effort to be more brave and to have more of these conversations. And to link it back to what I was saying before about the perception gap, the only way to really get a good understanding of people is to engage with them. And there's a little risk involved in that. But I want to take the risk and try to grow through that.
And I'm going to work on when I do engage or meet people that are different than me, whether it's politically, whether it's urban, suburban, whether it's young, whether it's old, to resist the temptation to guess what their perspective is on issues by bringing in that bias that I may have, to not presume that because they are this, they believe this. That's something I'm going to be working on. Trevor, Sahar, thank you so much for our first after-show conversation. Hopefully our listeners will feel as though this helps them in navigating these really complicated times and these complicated issues. Until next time, we are the Connection Effect Podcast.